and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest, November 20th, 2025. The DOJ is DOA edition. I am David Plotz of CityCast in Washington, D.C. Look at my face. Look at my face. Did you even know what I looked like?
Were you happier when you didn't know what we looked like?
Yeah.
Don't answer that question.
As I've always said, when people say I have a nice voice, I'm like, I've got a
face for radio.
Face for radio. But now, unfortunately, I have a face for YouTube, as does Emily Bazelon of the New York Times Magazine and Yale University Law School. Hello, Emily.
Hey.
Oh my God, you have a little flower in your background.
I do. I have a pansy that somehow made it to this point in the fall outside until I rescued it to come and keep me company up here. We'll see how long I can keep it alive, viewers.
Okay, well, hold on.
Oh, wait.
I've gone to get something to demonstrate the difference between me and Emily. Emily has this beautiful flowering thing in the background, a result of being near her and all of her nourishment. This is what I have in my office.
Oh, it's dead. It's dead, friends.
It's dead. It looks a little sad.
It was a former bonsai tree. It was a ficus tree. It was amazing. But the radiator broke in here. And so for a long time, it was approximately 98 degrees in here.
My girlfriend put a plant in my office. I think there's a flourishing plant. Yeah, there's a flourishing plant back there.
Oh, yeah, behind you. It's true. Your shoulder was blocking it. Hello, plant.
This week on Horticulture Today.
This week on the Gabfest, which is a podcast that most of you are listening to and not watching, Trump has destroyed impartial justice and gutted the Department of Justice far faster and more comprehensively than anyone expected. We will talk about Emily's really remarkable reporting on how he did that in the New York Times. Then the MBS visit was grotesque and gilded and obscene and corrupt, and you might even say piggy. Was it, however, canny for Trump to make such an alliance with the Saudi government? We will talk about that with Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan. Then, will Trump's 11th hour capitulation on the Epstein files get him out of trouble on that issue? Plus, we will have cocktail chatter. And reminder, tickets are going fast to our December 12th live conundrum show in New York City, slate.com/GabfestLiveNYC. We're going to be at the Society for Ethical Culture in Manhattan on that Friday with Stephen Colbert. And we're going to talk about your conundrums. So, for example, when getting your teeth cleaned or having a dental procedure, do you keep your eyes open or closed?
Closed.
Deep question, though. Deep question.
Here's an addendum I would like to make to that. When they ask you if you have flossed, do you tell them the truth?
Good. That's also a good one.
Apparently, nobody tells the truth and they know it.
I floss so much. Of all the people alive today, who will be the most well-known in 500 years? We have so many great conundrums that have already come in. You're going to keep sending them to us at slate.com/conundrum, please, slate.com/conundrum. But mostly, come and join us in New York City on Friday, December 12th, slate.com/GabfestLiveNYC, where Stephen Colbert and we will answer your deepest conundrums. Emily Bazelon published an astonishing article in the New York Times this week, an oral history of the Trump Department of Justice, as told by, I think, 60 lawyers, some anonymous, some not, who have left the department. The depiction of the systematic and sort of light speed destruction of the legal and moral norms is really demoralizing and jaw-dropping. Prosecutors fired because they worked on cases that Trump disagreed with earlier. Prosecutors ordered to find evidence to come up with a prosecution. Prosecutors forced or pushed to sign misleading statements and filings or be fired, and more and more. The article also comes in a week where the prosecution of James Comey seems on the verge of unraveling, with a judge finding just astonishing levels of incompetence, malice, and dishonesty in the behavior of the Trump prosecutors who brought the case. It's all so much worse than we thought. So, Emily, let's just start by having you tell us what you did, who you talked to, and then maybe which particular story stood out to you most as an example of how justice is being perverted now.
Yeah, sure. I just want to start by saying I wrote this piece with one of my colleagues, Rachel Poser, who was amazing to work with and was there every step of the way. So we basically realized that there are hundreds of lawyers who've been fired from the Justice Department since Trump took office, and thousands more who have resigned, right? 100,000 federal employees overall for the entire federal government have resigned. And A few thousand of them are in the Justice Department. And so we thought, well, if we start calling these people, what would they be willing to tell us now that they're out? And so we looked for people who were there for at least some of the shift, and then just kind of asked them, like, what stood out to you the most? And then we decided to tell the story as this kind of cumulative timeline since January. And the reason we did it that way is that, so much of the sort of news flashes have been reported along the way, right? It's not like nobody ever reported that Pam Bondi issued a flurry of memos on her first day on February 5th. But it's easy to get lost in the news beats and not sort of really be able to see what they all add up to. And we also just want to show what it felt like to be on the receiving end of all of this and how people struggled with the actual decisions they were forced to make. So here's a story that stands out to me, and I admit that it's a little bit in the weeds, so bear with me. But there was a lawyer in the Office of the Federal Programs Branch. They're the people who defend the government when they're challenged in court. And this is like a very prestigious office. There used to be 120 people there. It was like a big deal. Like lots of people I went to law school with wanted to work in this office. And they were having to defend the government against challenges to DOJ, right? So DOJ comes in and there's an executive order from Trump that gives DOJ some approval power over hiring and firing in other agencies. And so the government comes in and they're defending it. And there's a declaration from someone in DOJ saying we didn't have any power over personnel actions. And the judge who's hearing the case in her order, and she finds for the Trump administration, by the way, but in her order, she drops this footnote and she says, I'm not sure this statement is true given the text of the executive order. And I just want to remind lawyers they have a duty of responsibility to tell the truth in court. And then she dropped a mention of Rule 11, which is the rule that allows lawyers to be disciplined, sanctioned. It's like a big thing to have a judge say, you should be thinking about Rule 11 here. It's like a threat to your bar license. It's also just the sense that you really kind of blew it. And so someone else, another lawyer in the federal programs branch not involved with the case, told us that when the lawyers in the case said to their bosses, hey, this is really of concern to us here, their bosses wrote an email that said, NBD, no big deal. And, for legal professionals, that is just such an affront, right? To be like, hey, a judge said that maybe we didn't tell the truth here. And I feel like I'm on the line. My professional livelihood and license is on the line. And then you're telling me no big deal. I should say that when we asked the Justice Department, the spokespeople about this, they said, oh, well, immediately the supervisors offered reassurance. They just meant it was no big deal because clearly they hadn't produced anything in court that actually was a lie. But that's not how the lawyers on the receiving end experienced it, I think it's fair to say. And to me, that's just sort of breakdown in professionalism of that weedsy story that really sticks with me.
Can I ask you a question, Emily, about something you said about the way you displayed this? Because I thought one of its powerful aspects matters, because in the coverage of Donald Trump's successful challenging of norms, one of the big successes he's had is, what Steve Bannon referred to as flooding the zone. When so much of this activity takes place, it can be hard for the human brain to understand it in its totality. And our job is to put things in context and also help people understand the weight of things. And I thought that the way you displayed this was successful. And did you learn anything more broadly about that as you were thinking through how to tackle these individual instances, which are powerful in the way you just described, but also when in the total weight of things, it reminds me of that old line, 10,000 Elvis fans can't be wrong. When you put all of it together, it creates a certainty that's overwhelming. What did you learn about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is in some ways an old tool of journalism. It's an oral history, right? It's like you ask lots of different people for their perspectives on a particular event. When we started off, we were worried that it was just going to be so sprawling. There's so many parts of the Justice Department. There's so many stories you could tell. How are we going to make it cohere? And I think the answer to that is what you were saying, John, that you pick the stories that illustrate the themes you're hearing, right? So when you interview 60 people, you hear themes. You hear people say the same kinds of things over and over again. So for example, a bunch of people said to us, like, the way that we are supposed to do our work is we, as the Justice Department, go investigate something, right? Like whether it's a crime or a civil rights violation. And then we decide what to do, whether to indict someone or bring a legal challenge. But what we were being told now was like, here is the conclusion. Now go find the evidence to support it. And when you hear that again and again, you think, okay, I don't have to tell every single story I've heard of this, but I'm going to pick one or two that are going to give you a sense of what this was really like, and then figure out a way to weave the different events that we pick together so that you're sort of building. And even though you're asking the reader to do quite a lot of like moving from subject matter to subject matter, but hopefully the themes and the storytelling and the voices will kind of carry it through. And I do think that like this administration is just enough of a soap opera that this kind of format can succeed in a way. Like most administrations, you'd be much more like watching the grass grow. It would just, right? But like this one, it's just not like that.
And also then you provide the structure which says when your mode of operation is to have a conclusion and then go find the facts for it, instead of finding the facts and seeing if it leads to a conclusion, it would be like a surgeon saying, well, let's just operate on a limb, and when we're done, we'll figure it out if it's the right one.
Right. And I should also just say, like, it is so unusual for career attorneys to talk to the press, right? Like, these are nonpartisan public servants. They serve from administration to administration. Republicans, Democrats, they keep going. They're not supposed to talk to reporters, but these people have left, and they feel like this institution that they devoted themselves to is like effectively burning down in front of them. I mean, I talked to so many people who said, this was my dream job. I loved it. I worked so hard to get it. I wanted to stay there for my whole career, and it's gone.
I started keeping kind of like a little running tally of the categories of decay. So there's the one you just named, which is pick the target, find the crime. There's targeting people who worked on disfavored cases in the Biden administration. So like if you happen to have done the job that you were required to do during the Biden administration, that it doesn't matter that you were assigned that, you're out because you worked on disfavored cases. There's failing to enforce key laws. I think the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and the Foreign Agent Registration Act, the decisions basically not to enforce those laws, hugely consequential for reasons we could talk about. Pardoning based on political beliefs, selective prosecution of Trump critics, selective non-prosecution of Trump allies, shifting resources from drug and terrorism enforcement to immigration enforcement. What are some of the other ones? I mean, it's just shocking when you kind of add it all up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good list. It's like a cascade, right? And I mean, I do want to relate it to the events of this week, because the unraveling of this indictment of James Comey that is happening both in and out of court. I mean, there was a hearing this week that was jaw-dropping. I mean, the errors that Lindsay Halligan, the interim U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, she was installed just to bring this indictment. She had to do it really quickly because the statute of limitations on Comey's alleged supposed crimes was about to run out. And she just like made a whole host of errors, including one that may just be a kind of actually like easy way to just dismiss the whole case, which was that she switched up she tried to get the grand jury to charge 3 different crimes. They rejected one of the counts. And so she didn't want the piece of paper that she gave to the press to say on it, no bill, like, no, we reject one of these 3 counts. So she produced a new piece of paper with just the 2 counts that they did accede to. And only the 4-person ever saw that charging document. The whole rest of the grand jury did not, which is just like a flagrant error. There is no like harmless error in this circumstance. You just are supposed to do the thing, and she didn't do it. And the judge in the hearing on Wednesday had her stand up and answer to be clear that she had not shown the grand jury this charging document, and she admitted that she had not. And I mean, she also, according to the magistrate judge, like he redacted her actual statements, but she seems to have said things to the grand jury that were just like wrong on the law in a way that would have made it easier for the grand jury to indict Comey in a way that was deeply unfair to him. These are just
notably, let's dig into one of them, because one of them was apparently like, yeah, we'll show during the trial, we'll have more evidence.
Yeah.
We'll have more evidence
Right.
that will be, so don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, because we'll definitely have better evidence when we go to trial.
It's very much like Rudy Giuliani on the election saying, well, we have the conclusion.
There.
We just need to find the evidence, which is the doctor saying, oh, damn, it was the left leg we were supposed to operate on.
Yeah, it's real incompetence, which, like, okay, she's never prosecuted a case before. And in some sense, it's not surprising. There's another whole mess going on with the Texas redistricting effort, where the Justice Department sent the governor a letter saying you should redistrict because there's a problem with racial gerrymandering that you need to go fix. And then the governor went on TV and said, yeah, we're redistricting on the basis of race, which is totally illegal. And, there's other evidence, of course, that Texas was really concerned about partisan gerrymandering here. And so I don't know, maybe in the end they'll win. But like the Justice Department injected race in a way that was totally an own goal and messes up this case that President Trump cares deeply about, right? This is like his play for trying to retain control of the House of Representatives. Anyway, there's a cost to incompetence is my point. And I think our story kind of sets the stage for understanding why that is happening.
What I love it is you're saying there's a cost to incompetence, even if you are a deeply loyal Trump supporter. In other words, these two acts of incompetence that you've described are undermining his objectives.
Right. I mean, people are going to pay the price, like individual people, because of the problem of retribution and reward that we were talking about earlier. But also, like, if you've eroded the knowledge and the skill and the kind of leadership base of the career attorney corps, and you're asking them to do things they don't want to do, and then you have someone like Lindsay Halligan kind of stuck doing it herself, like this is what you get.
I was wondering, Emily, and maybe this is in the story and I missed it because it was pretty long.
Fair enough.
Maybe I missed this part. But did the DOJ officials you talked to who had left have thoughts on how a successor to Trump, so presumably, let's say a Democratic president who succeeds Trump, should handle the DOJ? Like what should be rolled back, what vindictiveness there should be, what I mean, there are now going to be a bunch of prosecutors who are at the DOJ who presumably were hired under these new presumptions. Should they be drummed out? Should they be chastised for the cases that they're going to bring or the incompetent prosecutions that they're bringing, or do we have to declare history void and just start fresh?
You didn't really miss it. I mean, one person talked about this a little bit at the very end. I feel like it's a whole other set of questions that people are obviously thinking about. There are a lot of people who left who are like really sad and are going out for drinks with each other and imagining whether they could rebuild the department at some point. The question you asked, there's going to be like, are there people who should be investigated for, criminally or I guess for civil violations that because of the way they're doing their jobs now? I mean, that suggests a kind of tit for tat, a retaliatory tit for tat that just seems like it could be a disaster. On the other hand, some of this stuff, it's going to be hard for the people who witnessed it to let it go. Then there's a question of purges, right? I mean, especially because the Supreme Court seems to be poised to make it much, much easier to fire people, even civil servants who we thought had protections. So I don't know how they're going to decide these things, but I do think that it's so much easier to break things than to build them, right? I mean, this is a lesson over and over again we're learning from the Trump administration. And even if you set aside the idea that you're going to purge people or investigate them, how you rebuild the sense of pride and integrity and really, really high standards that made the Justice Department like a plum job in the legal profession, that is going to be tough. I fear that because it has meant a lot to American law enforcement to have people really at the top of their game in those positions.
President Trump signed a bill passed overwhelmingly in the House and unanimously in the Senate that orders the Department of Justice to release the Epstein documents. It's holding ******, The loopholes are ginormous. We will talk about the Mack trucks that you can drive through these loopholes. You can be pretty sure that any documents that might be incriminating for the president will never be released by the attorney general, given especially what we've just heard in that earlier segment about this attorney general and how it is protecting the Trump administration. But it does seem to me to get a huge problem off of Trump's plate. It stops the drumbeat of stories about how Trump won't allow a vote on this issue. There's now been a vote. It's passed. Trump has signed it. But it does not mean that anything has been released, anything necessarily will be released. Pam Bondi can hold back practically anything she wants. John, I'm kind of surprised it took Trump so long to get to this solution, because I feel like this is the exit door he's been looking for, and it's a good door.
It is an exit door. I don't know if it's a good door.
Good. Explain why I'm wrong.
Well, okay, yeah. First of all, the loopholes. I mean, you almost expected to see a sentence that said, release everything unless the word Epstein is contained. I think what this reminds me of, and I don't know what film this is from, but when the person is being chased by the malevolent force, whether it's zombies or whatever, the last thing they do is they throw the empty gun at the zombie because they've expended all their bullets. I think I've used this metaphor before with respect to the president's effort to overturn the 2020 election. I think, he ran out to the front of the parade because he saw the vote that was going to happen in the House against his wishes. And we should remember how fulsome his denunciation of any Republican who voted to release the Epstein files was. I mean, it was significant. He torched one of his greatest allies, Marjorie Taylor Greene, called her a traitor, et cetera, because she had the temerity to try to argue for releasing the information on the grounds that the victims, who should always have been centered in the various legal proceedings related to Jeffrey Epstein, needed to be in this case. So he was vehemently against it. Then he saw the tide turning and ran around to the front of the parade. I think the reason this is not a slam dunk success, though the narrative you outlined is the most plausible one, is that there has been a way in which this, almost without other examples, has been one where his skills, his considerable skills at changing the conversation, convincing his supporters of whatever he wants to convince them, has not been successful. He employed all of the stuff. It was the Democrats' hoax. He gaslit. He did a bunch of stuff. It didn't work. So there's an unpredictability to this that you don't want to rely on. So I think that unpredictability still exists. Pam Bondi is going to do, as you say, but there has now been something just demonstrated that we haven't seen before, which is a gap between the president and his supporters. And in that gap, weird stuff can happen. And so in that sense, to the extent that that gap hasn't existed on almost any other topic, if you're the president, you can't have certainty that your plan is going to work.
Emily, one way that Trump and Bondi helped Trump this week to sort of skirt the potential consequences is they announced investigations of Democrats, or basically people allied Democrats or people allied with Democrats, for their potential ties to Epstein. Nothing, of course, about Trump or Trump's friends and their ties to Epstein. And, again, a sort of attempt to shift blame, attempt to sort of distract, to wave over here, pay attention over here. Do you think that's going to help at all? Will that work?
I mean, look, so you start the investigations. First of all, you start with the targets, not the crime, which is not the way criminal investigations are supposed to unfold. And second of all, one of the loopholes and the exceptions for releasing information in this bill is that the Justice Department can refuse to release documents if they pertain to an ongoing investigation. So you created the grounds to hold back the documents. And by the way, this is perfectly proper, right? If there was a bona fide investigation going on, we would not want the Justice Department releasing the raw FBI files related to it, because it could alert bad guys or witnesses. It can make people try to square their stories. Also, it's inflammatory and accusatory and not proven in court, right? There are all kinds of problems with that. So it's a real dilemma, except that the investigation seems fake and certainly incredibly selective in a way that's suspect. So, this is like a problem. This bill that Congress passed had bipartisan support, right? I mean, the Democrat Ro Khanna is one of the co-sponsors of it. And I think his theory of the case is like, there's so much public interest in this. The victims have been so deserved, as you were saying, over the years, that we should make an exception and have this release. And the question is, like, if the release is itself incomplete, and it seems like there are partisan, Trumpian reasons for that, what is it going to mean exactly? And if you're the Republican co-sponsor and you're from MAGA world, I suppose what you care about is just reassuring MAGA world. But like, I don't know, that suggests people are super gullible, that if you release something that doesn't seem like it's telling the whole truth, that's actually going to reassure anyone, which of course is the problem with shedding the credibility of the Justice Department to begin with.
And they haven't been credible. They haven't bought the line that, nothing to see here from the Justice Department or the president. I mean, they haven't bought that so far in multiple rounds of this.
But will they buy it if lots of stuff comes out and it's all about like Larry Summers and Prince Andrew? Like then it's okay. Then it's like, oh, finally the truth is out. It's all
possibly
Prince Andrew.
But can you use the scalpel that exactly to draw, to carve out just that stuff? I don't know.
Yeah, and if it's clear that it's partial, will that make people uncertain? I mean, the other thing about this is, we should say, like, the Biden administration had these files, those whole 4 years they were in office, right? So it's not clear what's in them. Like, it's just hard for me to tell why President Trump was so averse to this. Is it because there are lots more mentions like the ones we got last week that kind of are embarrassing but don't prove that he was having sex with 15-year-olds? Or is there someone else he's like, it's just hard to say.
Well, yeah, I think that the second point, which is that there could be other people whose interests are aligned with his, where it's not his behavior that's at issue, but it's theirs.
Or people
he
who
doesn't
have
care
something
about
on him.
He never once cared a jot. I mean, maybe his children.
Well,
but what if they
else.
have
if it's
things
a
on
person,
him, right?
Or a person who's aligned with his interests somewhere else, and he needs them to continue to be aligned with his interests on subject A. So if he does them a solid on subject B, I mean, there are all kinds of other ancillary reasons that one could be invested in the information not coming out that are not directly related to your being caught on tape or in a picture. And that to me, though, seems to me like, we know from people like the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, who said, yeah, well, Acosta, the former labor secretary in the first Trump term, who was the U.S. attorney, Emily, you can fill in the blanks on all that, but that's also one avenue of this. Jeffrey Epstein was a great blackmailer, and he used video and photographs, or the suggestion that they existed, and those were mentioned in this trove of emails that came out, to blackmail people. And so to the extent that the FBI, which raided his home, has that stuff, that would seem to me to be a pretty powerful. Can I just really briefly, connecting to Emily's previous topic, remember what this would look like if it was a real investigation? I mean, we become so inured to how the Department of Justice has become a personal arm of the president. But if you had a functioning Justice Department, they would say, immediately, this is not about how this affects the president. It's about serving justice to the people who the system previously failed. And in keeping with that, to make sure that there's no political flavor to this at all, we're going to have a special counsel, maybe somebody who's worked in both administrations, who's going to handle this. They're going to deal with any new information. They're going to make the decision about what comes in, what gets in, and what gets out. And we're going to make sure that there is no person involved who was the president's former lawyer. It's going to be a career attorney who looks at this information, because we want the truth to get out, because the victims here are the most important people that we care about. Like, that's what a normal functioning system would look like. And that the distance between that and what we're seeing, I think, is important to keep in mind.
All right. I'm going to just name two things, and then I'm going to close with a question. So, I mean, that quiet, picky moment, just astonishing moment where Trump, lashed out at a reporter from Bloomberg who asked him about Epstein, and the way he did it. Can you imagine? I mean, just disgusting. Also, it is, the shaming of Larry Summers during this is It's interesting. I mean, hard to work up too much sadness about that. But his behavior appears to have been pretty gross.
There's not been a great big Democratic groundswell to defend him.
I mean, can I also just say, like, there's a connection here. I mean, the sexism, the way that powerful men still sometimes talk to women, and I'm talking about Trump's remark, and talk about women, and I'm talking about Summers. Like, it's just still there. It's depressing.
Well, the whole thing is encased in the impunity of the elites and the forgotten Americans. And then women are, particularly in this context, included in that category of forgotten Americans. But if you really wanted to draw the big sweeping 30,000-foot view of the Trump administration, remember what his inaugural address in 2017 was about. It was about the idea that for too long, a small group in our nation's capital has reaped the rewards of government where the people have borne the cost. The establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. That's what the story is about, is the establishment protecting itself, creating a playpen where they could romp around, and the people who were dragged into that playpen, who didn't have the power and the money, were used and then discarded, and no one cared. That's the bigger story. And that is the thing that the sitting president dedicated his entire first term and his entire project towards. So,
final question to you guys. Do you think in 6 months that the Epstein issue is still a live grenade and it is still affecting Trump in this baleful way, or not? I say not.
What do you think's going to happen?
He's leached the energy out. He's lanced the boil, and there'll be some more material that comes out, but nothing. It's not going to be an obsession that's going to persist for months and months and months, and he will not bear a long-term cost for it. That is my prediction, but I'm wrong about like 97% of what I say on the show, so you should probably bet against that.
I would take it from another position, which is the president's approval rating is at about 36 or 37, which is as low as it's ever been, in part because the number one issue he was elected to deal with, which is prices. People think not only that he hasn't, but that he's made the situation worse. 24 million people are about to be affected by the Affordable Care Act tax credits going away. Energy is expensive. Childcare is expensive.
The tariffs have raised prices.
You've got an economy in which the wealthy are doing very well, but the rest are not. Foreclosures are up. Car loan defaults are up. I think that will be the issues that matter, so that Epstein is occluded by that whole hairball of things.
I think there is something lasting about this particular fissure, and it's like to the side of all the usual policy fights, right? But it's about how the system is corrupt in the way that you were just talking about, John. It's not just an attack on Trump, right? It's also the idea that like this terrible injustice occurred and the justice system failed. And if you don't get to the bottom of that, I think the people for whom this symbolizes and stands for all that other failure, I think they keep going, and they have their champions now, right? I mean, we have Marjorie Taylor Greene deciding to break with Trump over this. And if she doesn't bear a clear political cost for that, I think that's going to open the door to other Republicans starting to move away. It just feels like gravity, like, that Trump's, the feeling that he had changed something about Republican politics and there was no way to stand up to him, no way to challenge him. That feels like it's ending.
The Saudi visit this week was a perfect Trumpian spectacle. Fighter plane flyover, black stallions promenading on bits of the White House that the president has not yet paved over or torn down, an absurdly lavish dinner with trillions in net worth in gilded surroundings, all to advance a mutually delightful alliance between Trump and MBS. We are joined by President Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, who is himself the host of a new weekly podcast for Vox, The Long Game. Jake, welcome to the Gabfest. Did you ever ride a black stallion to greet the president of Uruguay when he came for a visit?
I did not. Although I will tell you one time when President Obama greeted the president of Uruguay, he was at that time basically a former pothead, maybe a current pothead. I don't know. So President Obama spoke to him about his history of marijuana. So there was that, but no black stallions.
So just starting with the visit, what did the Saudis get out of this visit, and what did President Trump get out of this visit?
Well, what the Saudis got out of the visit was, first, they got validation and an arm around the shoulder from the United States of America. They got to, stand on the biggest stage in the world, the Oval Office, a kind of state dinner, as you said, the F-35 flyover. So all the optics lifted up the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia as a major world leader. But they also got 48 F-35s, which the U.S. agreed to sell despite misgivings from Israel. They got tens of thousands of the most advanced American AI chips, semiconductors, which was, I think, the biggest thing that MBS wanted to get out of this visit. And while they didn't get a security guarantee, they also got this major non-NATO ally status and a defense partnership. So I think all in all, for MBS, this was a visit where he can go home with a lot in his pocket. I think for the U.S., it's a lot less clear what we got. Saudi Arabia said, we're going to increase the commitment we're making about investing in the United States from $600 billion to $1 trillion. But that $600 billion was never real. So the trillion isn't real. That's just kind of a headline number to put into a fact sheet. And we didn't get from Saudi Arabia any clarity on moving forward on normalization with Israel. So for me, I think easy to see what the Saudis got, less clear to see what the U.S. got.
I mean, I'll also note it seems like there's no timeline for those investments either, right? Making them particularly mythic, perhaps. So, I mean, I spent a lot of time thinking about the way that the memory of Jamal Khashoggi was just sort of glossed over in all of this pomp and circumstance. And then when reporters brought this up, President Trump, of course, berated them and in this incredibly callous way, just kind of pushed past this part of the story. I remember that President Biden also struggled with this issue, obviously, and did give MBS a fist bump memorably during his visit. I mean, how do you think about this? Like this murder, we have our own American intelligence that MBS is responsible for this murder. This is someone who was a dissident in Saudi Arabia, also a columnist for the Washington Post. What is the president supposed to do 7 years later, 8 years later?
It's a great question. And as you noted, President Biden wrestled with this. I wrestled with this. Everyone on our team did. And I think the way that I look at this is that two things can be true at once. One, this was a terrible crime that can never be erased and should never be repeated. And two, while that chapter will always be there, we do have to try to write better chapters with Saudi Arabia because they are a big, important country in a big, important region. And we have to try to do that for the benefit of the American people and for people everywhere. And, MBS himself is a very complex figure. You have the Khashoggi murder. And again, as I said, you have to stare that square in the face and you can't brush it aside. And President Biden didn't brush it aside. In fact, he published the CIA analysis of what happened, which the Trump administration had been holding back. But MBS has also worked to modernize his country, to end Saudi Arabia's support for global terrorism, to dramatically expand women in the workforce, to dramatically reduce the role of the religious police in Saudi Arabia. And he's an extremely popular leader among young Saudis because they see him as someone who is trying to bring that country into the modern era. So I think we do have to look at this guy in 3 dimensions, not 2 dimensions, which means holding these multiple truths in our head at the same time, which isn't always a totally satisfying answer, but I think it's the right way forward from the point of view of the United States.
And that complexity obviously doesn't embrace the idea that, what was striking about the president's answer was when he said things happen. I mean, that puts America's moral position in a really new category. Jake, help us understand exactly what America's national security interests are with respect to Saudi Arabia. I mean, some people may think about oil, but it's more complex than that. So as you're thinking through that balance you just articulated, what's in your head in terms of what Saudi Arabia is engaged with that is a kind of core part of U.S. national security interests?
Well, let's start with oil because I don't think you can just set that aside, not for quite a long time. It's true that the United States now is producing a lot of our own energy, but at the end of the day, the energy market is global and Saudi Arabia is a major producer. And the price of oil globally affects the price at the pump for Americans. So for your average American, this is a country that matters to their pocketbook. So that's one thing. Secondly, it sits right there square in the middle of a region that has been a source of considerable instability. And, the threat from Iran remains. The threat of instability and terrorism in the region remains. And remember that not long before you guys started your podcast, those decades ago, on 9/11, most of the hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. I think what MBS is trying to do with his country is take it from being the country that was producing all of those hijackers, like I said, to a country that is cutting off support for global terrorism. And continuing down that path is incredibly important to Americans because, of course, we suffered grievously from a different type of orientation from the kingdom. But then there are more modern challenges that I think Saudi is very relevant to. They are one of the most significant economies in the world, top 20. And they are working on advancing their technology in a way where they could become, I think, an important technology partner to the United States in a way that is secured and protected, as we compete with China over the commanding heights of AI and other advanced technologies. And finally, you have a country that has a significant young population that is looking to define a different future from the Middle East, for the Middle East. And I think the United States should support that, should support a cause of integration and peace rather than disintegration and chaos. And to the extent we can keep pointing MBS in that direction, that's a good thing too. So for all those reasons, and by the way, one thing President Trump mentioned yesterday that I think is actually worth reinforcing, he came out and said, MBS came and asked me to help work on solving the civil war in Sudan, which has caused so much death and harm and continues to. So Saudi Arabia remains a broker, a player in a lot of other places that the United States has interests, both strategic and moral, that we would like to see them being on a positive side rather than a negative side. And I hope that we actually do see some progress on Sudan.
You had a famous phrase, I think it's your phrase, the small yard, high fence, to discuss China's access to really valuable technology. And in this transaction between MBS and Trump, they're getting F-35s, which are these wonderfully advanced planes, which the Israelis in particular have used to great effect. And they're getting tons of the highest value NVIDIA chips. No, it's going to Saudi Arabia. But does this violate the small yard, high fence principle because of the risk of a pass through to China? Or no, we think of this as a sort of separate issue?
I think we can protect the tech on the F-35. We have, pretty good protocols in place to be able to do that. It's a risk, but I think the Pentagon, our professional military, can find ways to ensure that kind of exquisite technology is protected. I think your question on the chips is a great one, and the answer is we'll see, because the devil's in the details. There was an announcement to send them tens of thousands of these most advanced GPUs. These advanced AI chips. We don't send those chips to China so that, China could potentially use them against us. There is a risk that some of these chips could get diverted to China, or that they could get built out in data centers in Saudi Arabia, but China could access them remotely, or that just in general, Chinese investment in technology in the kingdom could allow them to take advantage of American technology to advance their own AI capabilities. These are real risks, and they require considerable effort to lock down the security and the anti-diversion efforts required to make sure that risk doesn't turn into a reality. I have to say, I'm not convinced that what the administration has done is sufficient in this respect, but we actually don't fully know because we haven't seen the fine print. So this was something that, we were very determined to make sure we had locked down when we left the Biden administration. The Trump administration has taken a more permissive approach. That makes me concerned. On the other hand, I do believe that for American AI leadership, we have to sell these chips around the world. We want the world running on an AI backbone with American technology, not with Chinese technology. But it's got to be done in an extremely careful way. And I just don't know if that's actually what's going to happen here.
So you mentioned a few minutes ago that MBS didn't really give anything in terms of the Israeli-Palestinian, I don't even want to use the word peace process, but in terms of imagining expanding the Abraham Accords in a way that could potentially involve the Palestinians, lead to concessions from Israel. Do you think that it's still realistic to expect the Saudis to play that role? Like, are they holding back right now because things are still so fragile with the ceasefire in Gaza and terrible in the West Bank? Or are things so, is it just hard to imagine a way that the Saudis and other Arab countries would really want to get involved?
Look, I actually think Saudi and some of the other Arab countries have tried to play a constructive role in getting to the ceasefire, the first stage. I think from here to your question, it gets a lot harder. But on the question of what it would take for Saudi Arabia to agree to normalize relations with Israel, to make a final and full peace with Israel, MBS has actually been really clear on this. I spent a lot of time with him when I was National Security Advisor working on these issues. And he's never wavered off of a pretty basic proposition, which is that in order for Saudi Arabia to normalize with Israel, Israel needs to accept and work for a credible pathway to a Palestinian state. And right now, what's hard to see is the current government in Israel, the current prime minister in Israel, agreeing to that. But it's not just about Netanyahu. Kind of across the board in Israel, there's a view basically that a Palestinian state would somehow be a reward for October 7th. I think that's wrong, and that this is the only way forward, the only long-term solution. But at the moment, it seems elusive. And because of that, it's hard for Saudi to say, okay, we're prepared to make peace with Israel, even despite the fact that there isn't material, concrete progress in a pathway to a Palestinian state. We'll see what happens as the elements of the plan, as they seek to implement them. And the next big step here is, can they actually get an international force into Gaza to begin the process of true stabilization and rebuilding? But my sense is that this is probably a ways off, despite the fact that I think the Trump administration hoped they could just kind of twist MBS's arm and get him to say something on normalization. He does not appear to have been prepared to do that.
Jake, let me ask you about another one of those complicated questions, which is the Trump family's personal business ties in the region, and specifically with respect to Saudi Arabia. Jared Kushner basically said his business ties, his deep involvement in the region, made it easier for him to negotiate. Might there be a way in which that is true? And how do you sort that out? Because doing business in that region is different than doing business in, the UK. How do you sort that? Is Kushner right?
Look, first of all, broadly speaking, my answer to that question is no, I don't think he's right. But, okay, let's go one level deeper. It's like a lot of Trump foreign policy, in my view. You can get short-term wins out of running a policy of basically bullying and corruption, right? You can extract things in the short term. But the long-term corrosion of that, I think, is just massive. It's just not a stable foundation upon which to build a foreign policy. So if the basic logic that Kushner is putting forward is, look, I do deals with these guys, they owe me a favor because, I've invested in this way, or I've told them I'll do that. So this favor they're going to give me is some concession on the peace process. Yeah, okay, maybe you get something out of it today, but I think on the whole, that's rickety and it will collapse around you. And it's no way to run a railroad. I also believe that you can make progress with these countries without engaging in, deep, intertwined, potentially corrupt types of dealings. And I think that's the way that we should proceed. So watching, I don't know as much, there's been a lot of focus on the Kushner investments over the last few years, but watching the Trump family, watching other family members of other members of the Trump administration kind of racing into the Gulf to monetize a lot of what is going on here, I think this is massively problematic and does not suit the American interest.
Just to state the obvious, so when you're saying it's built on a rickety foundation, that means that in order for future administrations to maintain this relationship built on this highly transactional private-public relationship, they have to keep engaging in the same kind of behavior.
They have to keep engaging in the same kind of behavior to keep getting this. It's kind of like, well, the last guy was paying me this. What are you paying me to get it done? But also, even within this administration, that kind of pure transactionalism, you end up getting dragged deeper into something that you don't fully understand. And at the end of the day, if you're not clear-eyed about what your interests are, what your leverage is, how to operate a foreign policy independent of personal business dealings, you're going to find one day you wake up and all of a sudden now you got to make a bigger compromise, or you got to do more than that you thought you were going to do. It's like any type of corrupt interaction. The first time it seems like it makes a lot of sense, but the second, third, fourth time you begin seeing you're essentially mortgaging your country's future. And that's what I think going down this road would do. So I think there should be an absolutely sharp dividing line between business in these countries and diplomacy and geopolitics in these countries.
Jake Sullivan, thanks for coming on the Gabfest. Check out Jake's new weekly national security podcast, The Long Game, available wherever podcasts are.
Yeah, please do, everybody. Listen to The Long Game. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll be talking more about Saudi Arabia and everything else. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Jake. Let's go to cocktail chatter. When there's no way to stand up because you have had so many drinks and you're still talking, what will you be talking about, Emily Bazelon?
I have some happy chatter this week in honor of our first video appearance. So there's a man in Louisiana, Calvin Duncan, who used to be, he became well known, to the world, but also to me, because he was an amazing jailhouse lawyer when he was in the Louisiana State Penitentiary. So he was convicted as a young man of a murder. He said he did not commit. He maintained his own innocence, but he also became really, really good at helping other people challenge their convictions. So eventually he was let out of prison and exonerated. And then he ran for office in New Orleans. It was kind of an unlikely campaign to become the clerk of the parish criminal court. And Calvin's argument was that New Orleans is terrible at letting people see their criminal records in a way that allows them to bring legal challenges, and he was going to come in and fix it. The person who held this office before was from a prominent family in New Orleans. He was an incumbent, seemed like he would win. And then he said that Calvin had not truly been exonerated and had ties to a, quote, cold-blooded murder. And it totally backfired on the incumbent. New Orleans is a place where lots of people have criminal convictions. And Calvin Duncan had a certain amount of just renown in the community. And he wound up winning in a runoff with 68% of the vote over the weekend. And he's now going to be in elected office, like doing this job, which for him is all about bringing justice to other people. So anyway, it's really, to me, quite inspirational.
John Dickerson.
Two brief chatters. One is that tonight I'm joining the good people at Covenant House again for their annual sleep out, which we do. We give up, our beds in solidarity with youth facing homelessness and to just raise money and awareness. So if anybody wants to or can donate, the link is in my Instagram profile, probably the fastest way to get there. So thank you for that. And thank you to all the wonderful people who have donated. And then my other is that Ann and I watched this movie called The Baltimoreans, which I don't know if you guys have seen, but it is the most charming film and it's just lovely. And it has a it's of this season of the year. And so watching it at this time is also, I think probably adds to the enjoyment. Anyway, so I recommend that for any of you out there. And it is not a British procedural. So for those of you who think that that's all I watch.
Occasional break in the screen diet. People with non-British accents.
You have a fuller picture of the complexity of the tapestry that is my psyche.
I also have great news in my chatter. Science has discovered the world's greatest anti-anxiety drug and also blood pressure lowering drug this week, seeking FDA approval. It is called Cheetah Cam. It is the most charming thing on the whole planet. There are 4 baby cheetahs were born during the shutdown in the Smithsonian's. The National Zoo has a facility in Front Royal, Virginia, where they do a lot of breeding and testing of animals that are in captivity. And they have a cheetah out there named Amabala, who's 5 years old, and she gave birth to a litter of 4 baby cheetahs. And there's a camera in the den, and it is the most freaking delightful thing you will ever see. And a camera and microphone, so you can actually also hear them vocalizing, and they make a wonderful kind of like a little bit of a rattly motor kind of noise as they purr. And the mom like pushing them around, the mom grabbing them by their scruff, her gorgeous spots, their fuzziness, them sleeping, them nuzzling. It is, I literally, watch it probably, every hour I check in on it. It is just so charming. Check it out. The Cheetah Cam at the National Zoo. Listeners, you also have chatters. Please keep them coming to us. Email them to us at gabfest@slate.com. We're not the only Slate podcast worth listening to this week. In fact, we may not even be worth listening to this week. I don't even know. It's not for me to say. But Dahlia Lithwick at Amicus has a remarkable interview. She's interviewing retired federal judge Mark Wolf. So Mark Wolf is the judge who made headlines last week when he talked about the threat that the Trump administration poses to law and democracy, and resigned his position on the bench. And he's talking
so that he could talk.
And he's giving his first ever podcast interview to Dahlia. So listen to that on Amicus. That is all for our regular episode this week, but we have a bonus episode in your feed. The can't look away car crash scandal that is Olivia Nuzzi, Ryan Lizza, RFK Jr., Mark Sanford. Wow, that's a dark topic. That is the opposite of Cheetah Cam. That is just for Slate Plus members, who also get other great stuff for their subscription. They get bonus episodes on other Slate shows. They get discounts to the cocktail party. Discounts to our live shows. They get to come to the cocktail party at our live shows, including our live show in New York, slate.com/Gabfest Live NYC. Get tickets. And they never hit the paywall on the Slate site. If you are a member, thank you. If you're not a member, subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus to get access wherever you listen. That is our show for today. The Gabfest is produced by Nina Porzucki. Our researcher is Emily Ditto. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is senior director for Podcast Ops. Milo Bell is executive producer of Slate Podcasts, and Hillary Fry is editor-in-chief of Slate. Please come to our show in New York and Manhattan on Friday, December 12th at the Society for Ethical Culture, where we'll be with Stephen Colbert talking about conundrums. You can get tickets at slate.com/Gabfest Live NYC. For Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We will talk to you next week, and look at you next week, looking at you deeply in your eyes like now.